All right, let's bring in, out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, criminal defense attorney John Day to talk a little bit about this case. This witness here, John, really just to set the reality for the jury of, you know, what happens after something like this. And you've got the custody. She took custody. Not, you know, she wasn't there, didn't have a ton of insight in terms of this case specifically. What about this case, this defense where you have basically say the medical conditions that this young man suffered from, that's the cause of his death, not the actions of the defendant. Is there some there?
Well, Ted, thanks for having me. So of course, what the prosecution is trying to do is establish that this death did not happen in a vacuum, that there was a history, well, maybe not a history of physical violence toward young Martin, but there was a history of dysfunction within his environment. So that's the groundwork that the prosecution is laying right now with this witness and other witnesses. The defense, as you brought up, the defense has got to hang all its efforts on the idea that this was a death of natural causes, that this young boy had medical conditions that would have led to his death absent, you know, any homicide. So the defense, it's going to be a medical expert heavy defense, because they've got to convince the jury that in spite of the evidence, in spite of testimony from medical examiners that this was strangulation, that in fact it wasn't, that it was natural causes, that it was a tragedy, but it wasn't a homicide.
And the issues of the young man, his physical issues, the prosecution is leaning into that, saying, oh, that's a contributing factor. This guy was frustrated. He was in over his head, and to your point, sort of had chaos following him. So the establishment of the boy's problems, you know, can help the state, can they not, in terms of the laying into that frustration from angry defendant?
Right. The building blocks that the prosecution is putting together is that the child may have had some issues, especially regarding, you know, things like accidents. He was wearing pull-up pants about age 6, age 7 still. And they want to paint a picture of a defendant who was so frustrated and had no other ways of dealing with this frustration other than to harm the little boy. And they're going to use the issues that came up in terms of the reaction of the defendant when he was notified at the scene, for example, about the child's condition, about having going to the hospital, about the child being dead. Witnesses, law enforcement, nurses, people like that are going to testify or have testified that his reaction was highly unusual. I mean, most people in the jury are going to relate this to their personal lives. And if you are a juror and you've heard of a tragedy, of a death of your family member or a close friend, you're going to have a reaction that's human. And the prosecution wants to establish that the defendant's reaction was so bizarre, was so cold, was so uninterested in what was going on, that in itself establishes that this thing must have been a homicide in the eyes of the prosecution.
Yeah, especially because the jury's finding out that there's a dead 6-year-old. I'm sure they each had a reaction just to this news of serving on this jury and hearing that a 6-year-old's dead, and then to find out that the defendant didn't flinch is going to be a huge part of the state's case. And we've already heard that from the prosecution laying it out in the openings. It's part of their case. Let's get a break. When we come back, we'll have more of the defendant, Darin Thrailkill's stepmother, on the stand. Stay with us. John Day is still with us. This witness, John, seems to be trying her best to help the defendant because she's sugarcoating some stuff. But, I mean, this guy is despicable. And if she had a different tone, it would go a long way. What's your take on her? You know, she's a saint for taking these kids and enduring all this. What's your take on her testimony? Who it helps?
Well, it helps the prosecution because the jury is going to see that, you know, this woman, while being a family member, she's trying to tell the truth. I think they're going to see that. But at the same time, the prosecution has to paint a picture, because this is essentially a circumstantial evidence case. Prosecution has to paint a picture of a guy who is as a dysfunctional father figure, as someone who is capable of murder, as they're going to argue in closing. And that his role as a father figure is flawed. He's got he's not the best father figure around. Of course, the defense is painting this as a medical issue. They're going to try to minimize all that. Prosecution is using this witness to build a case with the jury that the defendant was not anywhere near a saint. He was not a good father. He was not present. He was not participating. And in the eyes of the jury, the prosecution wants the jury to be thinking he is certainly going to be capable of doing what we say he did, which was strangle Martin in his bed.
Yeah. And our branding on this one is the father figure murder trial. It should be the non-father figure murder trial, given the testimony that we've been listening to. John, thank you as always.